Joining us now, NBC News investigations correspondent Tom Winter and former acting Solicitor General, now an MSNBC legal analyst, Neal Katyal. And Jonathan Lemire is still with us as well. Neal, if I could just start with you, it feels like the word that really stuck out there in the Justice Department response was criminal. What can a reasonable person deduce so far about what the search indicates and what they would have to conduct a search like that?
So I think, Micah, that the Justice Department's filing yesterday was absolutely expected. When I was at the department, we would resist any calls like this to release information in an active investigation. So none of this is surprising. What was surprising to me is one thing that the Justice Department said at page 8 of their filing, which is we need to keep this affidavit sealed because witnesses would be compromised and novel investigative techniques might be disclosed. What that suggests to me is that they do have a person or persons on the inside at Mar-a-Lago who are telling the FBI information about how Trump has handled these documents. It also might mean there are some technical monitoring capabilities, and the like. And so if you're Donald Trump right now, that's really going to cause you a lot more worry. I mean, he's already pathologically worried, kind of like a mob boss, about people flipping on him. But now he's got to worry even more. And given his kind of tortured relationship to truth, honesty, he's got to fear everything he has said to every person now. Because as Joe was saying a moment ago, it's not just what's going on at Mar-a-Lago and that investigation and who's at Mar-a-Lago who might be flipping on him. It's also Rudy Giuliani, who's facing a criminal indictment in Georgia and will be a ripe target to flip on Trump. There's Alan Weisselberg, who's evidently going to plead guilty this week. This is Trump's CFO of the Trump Organization. He's said he won't cooperate, but pleading guilty while the Trump Organization is facing a criminal trial on the very same issues in October basically dooms that trial as well. So, there's all of these different fronts. And with all of it, Donald Trump is saying overnight, as you were saying a moment ago, transparency, release the affidavit. I mean, give me a break. Transparency, we've been asking ever since the search, what in the world, Donald Trump, are you doing with these documents at Mar-a-Lago, these highly classified documents? Why do you need electronic intercepts and information on the French president? We've heard nothing in response. So transparency begins there.
So, Tom, what can we read into what we do know? We don't know specifically what's in these documents. We know what kind of documents they are because that was laid out by the Department of Justice. But if you are Donald Trump or you're in the inner circle of those people around him, what are you concerned about right now as you've just watched the pattern and the behavior of justice here?
Right. A couple of different things. First off, to Neal's point, with respect to transparency, the president's attorney has the affidavit. They could potentially release that if they wanted to or put that information out there. I'm sure the Justice Department wouldn't be happy about it, but perhaps the president's attorneys think that that's a bad idea to put information out. I mean, it reads like a criminal complaint. They have a wide latitude in that search warrant to put a lot of information in there that can be very damning for the target of that search. And let's be clear, the target of that search 100% is the former president of the United States. I think another interesting thing that was included in that document is they talked about a need for grand jury secrecy. They said Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure 6E, which whenever we see that as reporters, we say, oh, so a grand jury is definitely hearing information. That's not a complete surprise, Willie, because we know that a grand jury subpoena was issued previously in the course of looking into these documents. But I think when you look at it, the idea that the FBI went as an errand boy for the National Archives, if that idea was still alive, is now cold, dead, and buried after yesterday's court filing. It is very clear that this is a serious ongoing investigation, that people are speaking, and I think more details about that will come out in the course of the next couple of days. But I think it's interesting when you look at the totality of this investigation. Clearly, they think it's very serious. Jay Bratt, who's the chief of the counterintelligence and export section of the Department of Justice, signed this court filing yesterday. So clearly, this has gone to the top of the Justice Department for people that will look into counterintelligence matters, the secrets of the United States. I think there's a lot of information in there that points to the fact that this is quite a serious ongoing investigation.
And so, Neal, you have a criminal investigation into the documents, and of course, Eric Hirschman being subpoenaed before a grand jury. What does that grand jury likely look like, and what's it pertaining to most likely?
So we don't know exactly. We know that there are the grand jury is looking into two different things: the fake electors plot, as well as the Capitol attack. And the question that we don't know is, who are they looking at in response to these investigations? We know Jeff Clark is the guy, the environmental lawyer who you were referring to a moment ago, Mr. Oil Spill, is part of that. He was part of this whole plot to basically do on January 6th to throw out the vote. But we haven't totally know who else. My suspicion has always been that Donald Trump is part of that grand jury investigation. After all, the grand jury has subpoenaed Pat Cipollone and Patrick Philbin, who were President Trump's two top lawyers at the White House. And I don't think you take that step just to get some mere information. And now with Alan Hirschman also being called, Hirschman knows a lot about the January 6th plot. He was central to the Jeffrey Clark saga, so he has a lot of information. And as you might recall from the way he testified in the Hill, he is really quite an incredible addition. He gives basically reality TV confessionals. Congressional hearings are normally like a boring episode of Law and Order, but not when Eric Hirschman's involved. So I think it'll make for interesting grand jury proceedings. The one last thing I just wanted to say, Tom Winter, I think said, unless he has information I don't believe that Donald Trump's attorneys or Donald Trump has access to the affidavit in the search at Mar-a-Lago. They just have the warrant itself, and now we all do because it's been released.
Tom, so we talked about possible threats here, and one of them, there's grave concern that these FBI agents' names were released because of the warrant put out on Truth Social by someone close to President Trump or perhaps Trump himself. And we know that coincides with a real rise in violent rhetoric towards FBI agents across the country. We had the incident in Cincinnati last week, an arrest in Pennsylvania. Here in Washington, the FBI headquarters is surrounded by additional layers of security that went up in recent days. Tell us what latest your sources are saying about how concerned they are there could be more retaliatory strikes at the FBI, fueled by what we're hearing from the former president and his allies.
Sure. And just to clear up Neal's point, he is correct with respect to the affidavit itself. In other words, where this investigation is going and what they've developed, that is something that Trump's attorneys don't have. It certainly helps the case of this news organization and many others that have argued for the release of this affidavit that the president is now saying he agrees with it. But ultimately, it's not up to him. It is up to the judge, and it is up, obviously, the Justice Department has a huge saying in that. With respect to agents and with respect to the FBI, I think when you look at it and I was on vacation last week, so obviously a significant amount of my phone calls yesterday were to people in federal law enforcement, just generally, just to see what's going on in specific cases, not necessarily this one. But I think everybody feels this sense that there is somebody who is the former president of the United States who commands a very loyal audience, and the audience that he has. Just look at January 6th if you have any questions about that. And so I think when you look at the potential for threats with respect to federal law enforcement, it is significant to see the types of information that's gone out. There was a person that was arrested yesterday for making threats to the FBI. We obviously had the incident in Cincinnati last week where that individual died, but tried to commit an act of violence on that field office there. So when you look at this, it is something that is very real. I think it's something that is very significant. I think it's something that they're closely paying attention to. Separately, we were talking about Giuliani earlier and this idea of a target. It does mean something a little bit different in Georgia. It's not quite the same significance as if he was named a target on the federal level with respect to him potentially turning against former President Trump. I think that possibility at this point is low. The reason why is his attorney yesterday, Robert Costello, who represents Giuliani, told me it was, quote, delusional that he would speak about the conversations between Giuliani and the former president, that those would be protected by attorney-client privilege. Obviously, Giuliani is somebody who made it very clear was the president's personal attorney and vice versa. So I think the possibility of him talking about what I'm sure Georgia investigators are really interested in, which is what did the president tell you, Mr. Giuliani? I think the idea of that coming out in grand jury testimony as soon as tomorrow is probably a little remote.
NBC's Tom Winter and former acting Solicitor General Neal Katyal, thank you both for being on.